Okay, so I made a video yesterday that did not make sense. It was kind of convoluted and it was not precise and expressing what I wanted to say. You could watch the video over and over again and it'll eventually make sense, but I don't think that's something I should be relying on when it comes to trying to get across my points. Um, but, listen to it over and over again. I don't know, go nuts, right? But okay, so there's some clarification that needs to be made, and I need to break this down into three different things. So first of all, based on a Making Sense podcast, Sam Harris's podcast, which he interviewed Yuval Noah Harari, they were talking about the way the conversation has shifted from religion to science. So you think about the 14th century and the way death and medicine was all about religion. It was all about faith healers and Jesus Christ and all this stuff. And then in the modern day, it's shifted to science. And if you talk to somebody from the 14th century about death, it's in the hands of God. It's in the hands of God. These days, when you talk to people about medicine or death or life, for that matter, you're talking about an engineering problem. You're talking about a problem that is based on medical science, based on politics, based on funding. So death, as a specific example, is something to be figured out. It's something to be remedied. It's something that is based on complex economics, for that matter. It's something based on anything but God, and God has become kind of this relegated figure to the realm of fuzzy sort of like let's do this or not do this. But the point of the matter is that the language and the way people think about it has shifted drastically. Now, don't get me wrong, there are still religious people out there that still have ideas in their heads about medicine and all this stuff. I mean, there is a Christian sect. I should know this, but I don't. Um, there is a religious sect in the United States, specifically speaking, that refuses medical treatment for their ill. Um, which is so they still do exist, but in a general sense, the conversation has drastically shifted. So we're talking about something else now. It's medical science, it's policy, it's politics, it's those types of things. Now, the second thing that I wanted to bring up is the way that expansion of the language has not been seen in the institution of motherhood or on a personal level, motherhood. So there was a McLean's article that I read right after I watched the Yuval Noah Harari podcast with Sam Harris, um, that talked about the way mothers in modern time, we're not talking about the 14th century, we're talking about modern times. um, Sorry, I should mention who wrote the article in McLean's. It was a woman called Anne Kingston, and she wrote the article in McLean's about the way the language has not shifted when it comes to motherhood, even in modern times. So at at the get-go, you could think, well, why hasn't that shifted? Now, it's another generalization, but according to the article, women who have written about, motherhood or basically the disdain of motherhood have been sent death threats. So we still live in a society, and atheists still get death threats too. A lot of them do. Sam Harris still gets death threats, things like that. But motherhood is another institution that hasn't actually expanded in the general sense when it comes to redefining what it is, and including women that do not want to be mothers, but also including women that are mothers and have regretted making that decision in their life. Um, so those two things. So basically, the way the conversation has shifted to medicine and science when it comes to life and issues of death is something we're not seeing in motherhood these days. Like, women still feel like motherhood is this godly thing. Like, they still feel like it's this natural thing, that is shielded from the artificiality of modern life. Um, So I want to go a bit deeper on this, and this is kind of like the second point B, um, subsection B. Um, I just want to say that you could think of motherhood like you would think of religion, right? So with religion, you birth these beliefs. You birth these beliefs. These beliefs are under your domain, under your responsibility. For the most part, like, I mean, I do believe in individualism. I honestly do. Um, but when you birth these beliefs and when you accept these beliefs, there becomes this there's this no there's this fuzzy area between those two things where the beliefs actually control you. Like you are actually a slave to those beliefs. Um, Even though you are well deserving of not believing in those ideas, of doing your own thing and like having your own ideas. You are, but you're held hostage by these beliefs almost. And I think for a lot of religious people that's even more true. But I would say even for like God, I'd go so far as to say even with atheists, you still have this kind of like hostage feeling to religion, right? Like you're faced with something that has this overwhelming kind of hold on your society, on your life, indirectly, of course. But thank God for secular government, obviously. But yeah, for the religious especially, you're held hostage to those beliefs. And with motherhood, it's something similar, right? So you birth a child, and you had the decision to make that. You had the decision to have that child. You're in control. You're in control of finances. You're the responsible adult. Yet somehow that child is holding you hostage to a set of beliefs, to a set of ways of acting, of doing. Like, should you quit your job for this child? Yeah, I guess I could. I don't know. Like, I mean, like, what do I devote? Like, do I choose my child? Do I choose my career? I don't know. But once you have the child, you're kind of held hostage by it. And I see that similarity between religion and motherhood. Now, in both cases, I think atheism has come a bit further than the motherhood quandary. Is that the right word? Quandary? Um, I'll look it up after, I guess, but quandary or problem. So the language around religion has expanded because of science, because of a better understanding of the world, a scientific understanding of the world. Um, Whereas with motherhood, that expansion hasn't happened. And I think I said that before, but that's what the problem is. That expansion that includes women who either regret having children or don't want to have kids. The idea that you lose your social life, or you become an alcoholic. Like we've all heard stories of basically women coping with child rearing with a glass or two of red wine every day, mommy's time, Um, so we've heard that, and I think in both cases, the language needs to expand. So we're not the only atheists aren't the only one that have basically expanded, and I don't want to say atheists because some scientists are religious, but I want to say atheism is not the only framework or frame, okay, let's say framework, that has expanded the language around religiosity or expanded the language around religion or belief. Um, Religion tends to play that game too. Um, just like just like the opposite of motherhood, not having kids, or dare I say antinatalism, but we'll just say antinatalism and leave it there. But we can we can see how the atheism has expanded the language around religion to the benefit of mankind, to the benefit of mankind. So and atheism is not directly linked to science, but I mean, it is the reference point of atheism, right? It like you don't have to be uh, 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 a scientist to be atheistic. Like I mean, you could actually, but atheism has actually expanded that that automatic belief in God, and it leaves open basically scientific inquiry, etc., etc. So with motherhood, you want to have that same expansion, and but with so let's go back. Sorry, I kind of lost myself there, but somebody's yelling some weird shit in the background. But so with atheism, there came a kind of ballooning of the language, and science as a reference point, et cetera, et cetera. So God has been, like I said before, God has been relegated to this kind of like weird area of not really being involved with life and death. Um, so motherhood is the same thing. We need that expansion. We need that expansion of language. But religion actually plays the same game. So the other day, I'm looking up something called functional atheism. So the first place I found this was basically on churchandstate.uk.org, and they gave an example of functional atheism as people who go about their days, which is everybody, without thinking about the existence of God. Now, what does that mean? Well, God is inherently, and this is mostly for the Abrahamic religions, so I can't speak too much for other religions, but the Abrahamic religions basically classify God as omniscient. So if you go about your day without really thinking about God, so you masturbate, or I don't know, you have a threesome or whatever, you pick your nose, you do these little dirty deeds, right? All thinking that nobody's watching. But if you ask somebody who did those dirty deeds, and that was a religious, like, does God see everything? Oh yeah, yeah, for sure, God sees everything. God, yeah, absolutely, because God is omniscient and omnibenevolent and omnipotent, so he sees everything. But the functionality, or the de facto, or the operative mode that you're in, doesn't actually think God is seeing you, which is a core trait of God. So that's what functional atheism is. But I've noticed that if you do a search for functional atheism on Google, what you end up with is basically a bunch of Christian groups who are using functional atheism as the dirty word, right? So it's kind of like you have to look hard at yourself, and you have to make sure that God is involved in every single thing you do. Otherwise, you're guilty of functional atheism. So the level at which some of these religious groups want you to think of God is almost on the level of psychoticism, or neuroticism. And maybe they're overreaching. Maybe they're just overreaching because they just want you to think as much as you can about God. But religions are co-opting language um, to basically win people to the flock. You think about church planting, for instance, which is a new phenomenon, but they try to, it's a very insidious way that they enter the market. They enter the market with computer labs, but they're actually churches. So they're claiming territory, and I think the same goes for motherhood. Let's jump to motherhood now. I think there is a societal preference for people to be mothers, for women to be mothers. And I think it's beaten into a lot of women that it is your right, it is your natural right, it is your natural, sorry, not just natural right, but natural imperative to have children. You are a better person if you have children. You are continuing the human race if you have children. Um, you are satisfying your parents' wishes. You're satisfying your husband's wishes, and it is right to have children. Like we live in a society where we automatically believe it is right to have children, um, and it's to the level. It's up to the level of being psychotic, if you consider. I'm exaggerating. I don't necessarily mean psychotic, but it's up to the level of neurotic almost. That if you make a reference to that McLean's article that I just mentioned from Ann Kingston, that despite what you want to do, you have to have children. It is just what is right. Um, so the language on every level needs to expand. And don't get me wrong, the language has expanded around many of these subjects. Um, we have a new way of talking about motherhood, and we have a new way of talking about women's rights and women's careers and what they go into and things like that. But there's still these pushbacks, right? Um, so yeah, I think hopefully I did it better this time around. Um, yeah, like I can't explain more. Um, yeah, I think we'll leave it there. I think we'll leave it there. I think we just need an expansion of the language, and that needs to happen with motherhood as well. So, um, I guess what I'm trying to say in a very simple way is that motherhood is almost like this divinity, right? This religion, um, just as you could compare actual religion to it. Um, but yeah, that's all. Bye.